He slammed the violation notice against the screen door so hard it rattled on its hinges. Deborah flinched behind me, one hand resting on her belly, the other gripping the doorframe for balance. "That railing's not approved," Marcus said, voice smug. "You've got 48 hours to tear it out, or the fines start." I didn't blink. "Then you'll need to cite the clause that overrides ADA-compliant safety installations on single-family residences, because that rail meets county code and federal accessibility standards." His smirk twitched. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. I'm Thomas Greer, retired firefighter, certified home inspector. And the last person Marcus Bell should have tried to corner with made-up rules and intimidation tactics. That railing? I built it by hand for my wife, Deborah, after she tripped on the slick stone steps our builder claimed were safe enough. She's 36 weeks pregnant now, after 3 miscarriages in 5 years. This baby is a miracle, and there's no way I'm risking her safety so some HOA tough guy can flex in front of his clipboard. He doesn't know what that railing means to me. It's not just wooden bolts. It's a promise I made after the last fall when I sat in a hospital hallway watching an ultrasound screen go still. It's protection. It's guilt carved into pine. And it's staying right where it is. Where are you watching from? Because if your HOA has ever pushed too far, you'll want to stick around for this one. Marcus Bell thinks he's dealing with a quiet retiree who'll roll over at the first fine. What he doesn't know is I've already started gathering the evidence. And once I start moving, I don't stop until the house is fireproof. Deborah opened the door a few inches and leaned into me, her breath tight. "He's been circling in his car again," she whispered. "Yesterday, too." I clenched my jaw. "Inside, hun. Now." Marcus watched her retreat like a hawk watches a wounded bird. I could see it in his eyes. That sense of authority he thought gave him the right to hover, to harass, to humiliate. "Security enforcement is part of my board duties," he said, arms folding. "Don't make this personal, Greer." "You made it personal the second you scared my wife." I stepped down from the porch, making sure he had to look up at me. I'm not a big guy, but I've carried people out of collapsing buildings, and I've walked through heat that would melt the paint off his SUV. My voice stayed level. "You come back here without cause, we'll talk trespassing charges. Or we can talk to the county inspector about your little common area paving project. Heard those drains aren't up to code." His eyes flickered. Good. He doesn't know I've already walked the neighborhood. Doesn't know I've got friends on the block who've had enough of him too. Doesn't know my son, Eric, is flying in tomorrow, on leave from Camp Pendleton. As Marcus stalked off, I turned back to the railing, ran my hand along the grain. Every screw sunk clean, every cut square. I built it on a Sunday morning, after Deborah's last scare, when she sat in the rocker crying quietly so the neighbors wouldn't hear. She didn't want it to look like we were messing up the front yard. I didn't care. I just wanted her to feel safe stepping out the door. I'd already failed once. Never again. And here comes Marcus, threatening fines, throwing papers, treating the people he's supposed to serve like they're beneath him. The mistake he made? He thought this was about a railing. It's about the woman I love. It's about the child we almost didn't get. It's about the idea that no one gets to threaten your family and call it compliance. I headed back inside and closed the door, clicked the deadbolt. Then I sat at my desk and pulled up the HOA charter on my old laptop, scanned for the section on enforcement, took notes, highlighted phrases I knew he'd skipped over. Let's see what Marcus does when someone reads the fine print better than he does. And let's see what happens when his own board starts asking questions. The next morning, I stepped out to get the mail and caught the tail end of Marcus's SUV creeping past again. Same slow roll, same mirrored sunglasses, same barely hidden smirk. He didn't stop this time. He didn't have to. The message was clear. Deborah watched him from the kitchen window, one hand resting low on her stomach, the other wrapped around a chipped coffee mug she hadn't put down all morning. I said nothing, just placed a hand against the railing and took a breath. The wood was still smooth beneath my fingers, solid, anchored, just like it needed to be. What Marcus didn't realize is that guys like him operate off fear, paper threats, half-truths, and volume. But I've spent my life sorting out what's real in the middle of smoke and chaos. and fear only works if you let it grow in silence. So, I didn't stay quiet. By noon, I was walking the sidewalk to visit the neighbors I hadn't properly spoken to since the last block BBQ, pre-pandemic, when Marcus was just the guy with the too loud stereo and a fancy smoker. First stop was the Garrisons, retired couple, sharp as ever. June answered the door, saw my face, and sighed like she'd been waiting. "Let me guess," she said. "The railing." I nodded. She stepped aside without asking. Inside, the place still smelled like lemon polish and old books. "He tried to get Paul sighted last fall," she said as she poured coffee. "Over that wheelchair ramp he installed for his sister. Said it altered the neighborhood aesthetic. The board never even voted on it." "Did they back him up?" She shook her head. "Marcus is the board. Or he thinks he is. Everyone else just lets him act like he speaks for them. Easier than dealing with his temper." That tracked. I'd seen it up close already, and so had Deborah. June set her mug down. "You know he once told Eliza Franklin she had to repaint her door because the shade of blue was too expressive?" I blinked. "That woman's door is slate gray." "Exactly." I took out my notebook. "Would you be willing to write a short statement? Just a couple sentences?" She nodded before I finished the sentence. "If it means someone's finally standing up to him." I left with 2 pages of notes and the creeping sense that Marcus had been on this power trip a lot longer than anyone realized. And he'd been clever, isolating his targets, threatening one at a time. Most folks kept their heads down, paid the fines, repainted the doors. But this wasn't about paint anymore. I visited the Bernsteins next. Same story. Minor violation, vague threats, no formal vote. A pattern was forming, and it wasn't subtle. Then, as I turned the corner onto Willow Bend Court, a voice called from a second-story window. "Mr. Greer?" It was Daniela Chen, high school teacher, lived 3 doors down. She jogged down her front steps barefoot, waving a manila folder. "I heard about your wife," she said, concern etched deep. "And Marcus." I nodded. She opened the folder and handed me a printout. "Last summer he left this on my door, said my recycling bin was out past curb time. Tried to fine me $100. "That's not even enforceable," I muttered. "Right, I thought so too. I asked him for the bylaw. He told me I could look it up myself, and walked off." "Did you?" She smiled. "Yeah, it wasn't there. I emailed the board, got no response." I added her copy to my growing file. More than 6 instances now. Different people, different blocks, same tactics. What struck me most was the tone in their voices. Not just frustration, but shame. Like they'd failed by standing down. Like Marcus had made them feel small and they'd believed it. That's the part that pissed me off most. By the time I made it back home, the sun was low and Deborah was on the porch, resting in the rocker I built for her last spring. She looked up, concerned. "You were gone a while." I handed her the folder. "So was Marcus. Just one house at a time." She flipped through the pages, her jaw tightening. "You're building a case. I'm building a wall. And Marcus?" He'd spent years carving a path through this neighborhood with his empty threats and barking orders. But now, for the first time, someone was walking behind him, measuring the damage, naming the cracks, and preparing to dig in. And I wasn't alone. The next afternoon, I found her where I expected, at the mailbox kiosk near the playground, sorting envelopes like she was being timed. Lynn. Forrester always moved with purpose, like if she stood still long enough, someone might ask her a question she didn't want to answer. I approached slowly, mail in one hand, folder in the other. "Lynn," I said, keeping my tone easy. "Got a minute?" She hesitated just long enough to make it awkward. "Thomas." She smiled, polite, strained. "How's Deborah?" "Resting," I said, keeping her feet up. "Baby's still holding strong." "That's good to hear." She shifted her stack of envelopes to her other arm, thumb running along the edge like she needed something to fidget with. I held up the folder. "Been walking the block, talking to neighbors, about Marcus." Her smile faltered just for a breath. "Oh? I've got 6 families saying he issued violations without board votes, threatened fines, handed out citations for things that don't even exist in the CC and Rs." She blinked. "You're collecting complaints?" "No," I said. "I'm collecting facts." She glanced around like someone might be listening from behind the azaleas. I'm not sure what you're expecting from me. I'm expecting honesty, I said, from the person who signs the monthly board minutes. Lynn shifted again, adjusting her cardigan sleeve like it was suddenly too tight. The board votes, she said carefully. Most of the time, Marcus just expedites enforcement. I raised an eyebrow. So, he acts without approval? She didn't answer, didn't nod, but her silence said enough. Lynn, I said softly, he tried to intimidate my wife, twice. Once on our porch, once in public. Her eyes widened slightly. That landed. She's pregnant, after 3 losses, that railing he wants torn down. It's the only reason she hasn't fallen again. Lynn's shoulders sank. She wasn't made for confrontation, that much was clear. But her discomfort wasn't just bureaucratic, it was personal. Her eyes kept flicking away, then back. Her lips parted like she might speak, then shut again. Do you know how he got on the board? I asked. She swallowed. He ran unopposed. Because no one knew how much power came with the job, I said, until he started using it like a weapon. She stared at her feet, then muttered, I didn't want to be secretary. I just wanted to help organize the community book drive. But after Marcia moved, they just slid the role over to me. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Lynn, has he ever sent notices without your knowledge, skipped board meetings, filed complaints on his own? Her fingers gripped the envelopes tighter. I'm not supposed to talk about internal board matters. You're not supposed to let someone harass your neighbors under color of authority either. Her jaw twitched. I softened my tone. You're not the enemy, Lynn. But if you stay silent, you're his shield. That hit. She blinked. Hard, and for the first time, I saw it. The crack. Not guilt, not shame, something heavier. Resentment. She turned slightly away and took a deep breath. You didn't hear this from me. But Marcus bypasses protocol more than the rest of the board knows. He drafts notices himself. He keeps copies in his car so he can serve them on the spot. And when we question him, he says he's just following interpretation. Which means whatever he says it means, I muttered. She nodded, barely. Do you have copies? I asked. I have emails, she said. On my personal account. Ones that show he ignored board votes. One where he told a resident she'd regret pushing back. I blinked. You kept them? I forward anything that makes me uncomfortable, she said, voice low. Just in case. She looked up, finally meeting my eyes. I never thought I'd need them. I stepped back. You might not, but I will. She didn't stop me when I turned to go. As I walked home, I felt it shift. The pieces weren't falling yet, but I could feel them loosening. The kind of subtle give that comes before a structure fails. Not because of impact, but because of rot. Lynn wasn't ready to stand beside me yet, but she'd moved, and that was more than Marcus would ever see coming. I didn't see Marcus again for 3 days, not on the street, not parked in his usual spot by the tennis courts, not crawling past our house like a shark with a clipboard. But his absence didn't feel like retreat. It felt like the breath someone takes before they swing. Deborah and I were walking the perimeter of the community garden that afternoon, slowly so she could stretch without overdoing it. The air was warm, thick with rosemary and citrus, and for once, her hand wasn't clutching my arm for balance. That railing had done its job. We'd just passed the basil beds when the sound of tires on gravel made us both turn. Marcus's SUV pulled in hard, spitting dust behind it. He climbed out before the engine finished ticking down, clipboard in hand, sunglasses on like armor. You again? I said, already stepping between him and Deborah. He walked fast. No wave, no pretense, just aggression on autopilot. You were warned, he snapped, flipping the clipboard up like it was a badge. Non-compliant modifications must be removed. That railing violates aesthetic cohesion. You don't get to define cohesion, I said. You're not an architect, and the board didn't vote on this. It falls under my enforcement jurisdiction. Does it? I said calmly. Because your secretary says otherwise. His lips curled. Lynn's not in charge of interpretation. But she does keep your emails, including the one where you told a resident she'd regret pushing back. That stopped him cold, just for a blink. Then the mask returned. You're bluffing? Try me. Deborah reached for my elbow. Her voice was quiet. "Let's just go, Tom. He's not worth it." But Marcus didn't move aside. He stepped forward instead, too fast, and then he raised his hand. Flat. Not a fist, but the intent was unmistakable. Some kind of warning gesture. Some primal display of dominance. That's when I saw Deborah flinch, and that's when Eric's voice cut through the air like a dropped hammer. "Touch her, and I'll drop you before you hit the mulch." We all turned. Eric was walking up the path, tan uniform shirt unbuttoned at the collar, duffel still slung over one shoulder. He looked like someone who hadn't slept, but wasn't about to let that slow him down. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Who the hell are you?" "Her son," Eric said, jerking his chin toward Deborah. "And his," nodding toward me. "Marine Corps." Marcus didn't move. "You think being on some neighborhood board gives you the right to raise your hand at a pregnant woman?" Eric asked, stepping in close. "Because where I come from, that's not a citation. It's a dishonorable discharge." For once, Marcus had no words. Eric took another step. "You're gonna leave? Right now? Or we'll file a police report, and I'll happily testify under oath about what I just saw." The silence that followed was thick and brittle. Marcus looked from Eric to me, then back again, like he was trying to find some escape route that didn't look like retreat. Then he turned, climbed back into his SUV without a word, drove off slower this time, not out of defiance, but because he knew we were watching. Deborah let out a shaky breath and leaned into me. Eric dropped the duffel in the grass and knelt beside her. "You okay, Mom?" She nodded slowly. "Now I am." We sat for a while in the garden's shady corner, just the three of us. Eric's presence calmed something in her. In me, too, if I'm honest. It reminded me that we weren't alone in this fight, but more than that, it shifted the balance. Marcus wasn't invincible, and now there was a witness, a decorated one. And if push came to shove, we had both testimony and motive. Later that night, as Deborah slept and Eric unpacked, I looked over the growing file again. Violation photos, testimonies. Lynn's careful words still ringing in my head. We weren't just reacting anymore. We were building something. 2 days after the garden incident, I was back on my routine walk. Only this time, I wasn't just stretching my legs. I was hunting. The sidewalk curved around the community pool and led straight past the HOA's newest little trophy project, a perimeter fence meant to increase security and resale appeal, according to the last newsletter. It was sleek, sure, but built fast. Too fast. And I had questions. I crouched beside one of the posts near the northeast corner. The concrete footing was already spiderwebbed with hairline cracks. That alone wasn't damning. But the spacing between balusters? I pulled out my tape measure, 4.5 inches. Code required 4, maximum. I ran my fingers along the inside base. Uneven pour, shallow depth. I tested the verticals. One wobbled with almost no pressure. There it was. Not theory, not a rumor, proof. I pulled out my phone and snapped photos from every angle. If Marcus was going to swing bylaws at us like a weapon, I'd meet him with something far more dangerous. Building code. That fence was a shared community structure. HOA funded. HOA approved. Which meant, by law, it had to meet county safety regulations. And it didn't. And if it didn't, that meant liability. I stood, dusted off my knees, and took one last photo, wide angle, time-stamped. Then I turned and nearly ran straight into Paul Garrison. He'd been walking his dog, that grizzled retriever with the lazy tail. "Caught you measuring," Paul said, smiling slightly. I was wondering when someone would finally do it. "You've noticed too?" I asked. "First windstorm knocked one of the panels loose," he said, pointing toward the western lot. "They bolted it back in with deck screws." "Jesus!" "I filed a complaint," Paul added. Guess who never responded? I didn't even need to say the name. We walked together to the cul-de-sac, talking low. He told me 3 more posts along the playground side were loose, that the contractor hired wasn't licensed for commercial installations, that the invoices listed Marcus as the sole project lead. Now, that was interesting. "Mind writing all that down?" I asked. Paul patted his pocket. "Already did. Thought you'd ask. I went home with more than photos. I had structural violations, unlicensed labor, and a paper trail that led straight back to Marcus Bell's clipboard. Deborah met me at the door, holding a folded note. Lynn dropped this off, said she couldn't stay long. I opened it, 2 sentences, typed, not handwritten. Per your inquiry, no board vote was held regarding the fence installation. Expense was marked as an emergency repair and pushed through by Marcus under Section 9.4. I read it again. Section 9.4A was for urgent safety threats, like gas leaks or structural collapse, not aesthetic upgrades. Deborah watched me read. What does that mean? It means he broke protocol, again, and this time the paper trail leads to real-world risk. Eric stepped into the kitchen behind her. You're saying that fence is illegal? I'm saying it's out of code, unauthorized, and potentially dangerous, which means the HOA's insurance provider would be very interested to learn who pushed it through. I sat at the kitchen table and laid it all out. Photos, measurements, neighbor statements. Lynn's note on top like a cherry on a sundae of negligence. Eric crossed his arms. So, what's the next move? Simple, I said. We escalate. I could see it now. Marcus had been operating unchecked for too long. No oversight, no pushback, and no fear of consequences. Until now. Because when safety gets compromised, real, documented safety, it stops being about taste or policy. It becomes a matter for the county, and I knew how to speak their language. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room with a yellow legal pad, scribbling dates, violations, and names into columns. Every entry tied back to Marcus, his signature, his timing, his overreach. Deborah's breathing came slow and steady from the bedroom down the hall, and that sound was the only thing keeping me grounded. But my thoughts kept circling back to one thing. What if she had fallen again? That railing he tried to strip from our porch wasn't some cosmetic upgrade. It was the reason she could walk in and out of our home without bracing against me. I'd seen the look on her face that first day without it, back before I built the thing. Tense, uncertain, like every step was a gamble, and after everything we'd lost, every test, every quiet heartbreak, I wasn't going to let a petty enforcer turn our front steps into a battlefield. By morning, I was done deliberating. I wasn't building a folder anymore. I was building a case. Eric walked in with 2 mugs of coffee just as the sun cracked over the neighbor's rooftop. You look like you've been up all night. I was. He glanced down at the stack of notes and photos I'd laid out across the kitchen table. This looks surgical. It has to be. I took a sip, then pointed to the highlighted entries. We've got enough now. Safety code violations, procedural abuse, and an insider who's ready to talk. But none of it matters if we don't do something with it. Eric nodded. So we're going public? Not yet, I said. First we send it up the ladder. Deborah entered the room in her robe, rubbing her belly. Send what? I looked at her for a long second, then said it plainly. A complaint to the county inspector's office, anonymous at first, just to get their eyes on the fence. Her brow furrowed. You think they'll respond? If they get photos like these, yeah, liability like that doesn't get ignored. She leaned against the counter. Do you need me to sign anything? Not yet, I said. I don't want them near you. Marcus already knows you're the pressure point. That's why he showed up at the garden. I can handle myself, she said quietly. I know, I replied, but you shouldn't have to. I stepped into the garage later that morning and pulled down the fireproof lockbox where I kept my inspection license, old certification forms, and client reports from before retirement. Most of it was filed away by muscle memory, clean, orderly, with tags and dates. I found what I needed in under 10 minutes, the county building code handbook and a signed inspection checklist I'd submitted to the city 3 years ago. Still valid. With that, I could cross-reference and confirm every violation on that fence. Post spacing, footing depth, unlicensed labor. If I spoke up, it wouldn't be a complaint from a bitter neighbor. It'd be testimony from a certified safety inspector with a long-standing record, and they'd have to listen. That afternoon, Eric and I drove to the opposite side of the subdivision. He handed out flyers for a neighborhood potluck I invented on the spot, just an excuse to have a gathering soon, get people in one place. Meanwhile, I stopped by 3 more homes where I knew Marcus had caused trouble. 2 of them gave me more statements. One gave me a copy of a payment receipt for a fine Marcus had never cleared with the board. The file was growing faster than I expected. By the time we pulled back into the driveway, the folder was too thick to close. "Looks like a war chest," Eric said, flipping it shut. "It is," I said, "and I'm ready to fire the first shot." But inside me, it wasn't anger that burned anymore. It was conviction. A quiet, focused kind of clarity, the same feeling I used to get walking into burning buildings, knowing the structure was compromised, knowing people were inside, and knowing the only way through was forward. Marcus Bell had crossed a line when he tried to touch my wife. Now I was drawing one he'd never get past. She showed up just after dark. No knock, no doorbell. Just the quiet crunch of shoes on gravel, followed by a soft tap against the frame. I opened the door to find Lynn Forrester standing on the porch, arms crossed tight over a manila envelope, her eyes flitting from the street to the steps to my face like she was calculating risk with every blink. "I don't have long," she whispered. "I parked 3 blocks over." I stepped aside. "You're safe here." She hesitated, then stepped into the entryway. I closed the door behind her. Deborah's voice called faintly from down the hall, but I shook my head, and she stayed back. Eric appeared in the kitchen archway, barefoot and watchful. Lynn's hands trembled as she offered the envelope. "Everything I told you I had, it's in here." I took it carefully. "Why now?" She looked down. "Because I saw what happened at the garden. I saw the report Deborah tried to file with the board. Marcus intercepted it, never even put it on the agenda." "You were there?" "I was the one who told him she was in the garden," she whispered, and suddenly her voice cracked. "I didn't know what he'd do. I thought he'd just issue another citation." Eric's jaw tightened. I reached out not to comfort, just to steady. "You came now. That counts." She nodded. "I didn't know what else to do. He's not just ignoring procedure, Tom. He's rewriting it, making up rules, threatening us, quietly, but enough." I opened the envelope and scanned the contents. Emails, dozens of them, some printed from Marcus's HOA account, others forwarded from her personal email. A chain where another board member asked for a vote, and Marcus replied, "Handled. No need for discussion." Another where he bragged about streamlining enforcement. One message, buried in the middle, was time-stamped a week before the fence was even proposed, with a contractor already CC'd. He'd planned the installation before pretending it was an emergency. I flipped another page and found a spreadsheet, Lynn's own notes, a list of dates, board absences, missing approvals. On the bottom, security gate expense misclassified as landscaping, no receipt. I whistled low. "You've been tracking this a while." "I didn't know what I was looking for," she said, "but I knew something was off. And now? Now I want him out." Eric spoke up from behind me. He threatened my mom, tried to put hands on her. Lynn didn't look surprised, just defeated. "I should have said something sooner," she said. "You're saying something now," I replied. "That changes everything." She stepped toward the door. "I can't be the one to present it. Not yet. I have a son in middle school. We live 6 doors from him." "I understand. But if you submit it, anonymously maybe, or just say it came from the records request." "We'll handle it," I said. "And when the board starts asking questions, you stay quiet. Let them reach out." She exhaled slowly, some weight lifting from her shoulders. "You're going to expose him, aren't you?" I nodded. "With your help, yes." She hesitated at the threshold. "Be careful, Tom. He's not used to losing." Then she slipped into the night, coat drawn tight, the crunch of her footsteps fading into the stillness. Eric closed the door behind her. "You trust her?" "I trust what she gave me." We laid the documents out across the dining table, page by page. The email trail confirmed everything: unauthorized violations, procedural manipulation, even a complaint from another board member that was buried. But it was one note in particular that made me pause: an HOA reimbursement form signed by Marcus, reimbursing himself for community outreach expenses. Amount: $1,250. No receipt, no details. Deborah joined us quietly, eyes scanning the mess. "That's enough to trigger a board audit," she said softly. I looked up. Exactly. We had a motive now, financial abuse, and we had internal evidence. All we needed was the right moment to force it into the open. And that moment was coming fast. Because with Lynn's testimony, Marcus's private war had just become a public scandal waiting to happen. I spent the next morning doing what Marcus never expected, reading. Not just the HOA charter or the county codebook. I pulled old architectural permits, public zoning records, even scanned through board newsletters from the last 4 years. I needed a complete picture, because when you're facing someone who twists rules to suit himself, you don't win by pushing back. You win by pulling the rug out from under him. Eric sat across from me, sipping coffee and sorting witness statements. Deborah, bless her, was finally resting in the bedroom after another restless night. Her ankles were swelling, and I could tell the tension was wearing on her. But she never once asked me to stop. Midway through the documents, I found what I was looking for. Section 6.7c, Board Voting Requirements. Any expenditure over $500 not explicitly categorized as emergency repair must be approved by a majority vote, documented, and signed by at least 2 board officers. The fence install, $13,200, signed only by Marcus. I highlighted the line and slid it across to Eric. "This is it," I said. "He didn't just skip the vote. He violated spending authority." Eric raised an eyebrow. "That's embezzlement territory. Close enough to trigger an audit, especially with Lynn's spreadsheet showing misclassified expenses. But I wasn't done yet. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in over a year. "Vasquez Inspection Services," came the voice on the other end. "This is Tom Greer, retired inspector, license number 443-9082. I need a peer consult." The voice paused. "Tom, it's been a minute. I need verification on fence code violations. Pictures, dimensions, spacing, everything's documented. I just need another certified set of eyes." "No problem," Vasquez said. "You filing with the county?" "Soon," I said. "But first, I want to make sure what I've got would hold. I'll send you a sign-off checklist tonight." Click. That was the last piece. My certification was enough to raise questions, but corroborated by another professional, it became undeniable, all backed by Lynn's documentation. I turned to Eric. "We don't wait anymore. This isn't about just us. It's about every family on this street who got pushed around." He nodded. "So what's the plan?" "We do this in stages. First, submit the fence violations and safety concerns anonymously to the county building inspector's office. That opens the door. If they investigate, Marcus is on defense. And the rest? We deliver a formal board petition, 10 households minimum, requesting an emergency board vote on Marcus's authority and finances. Once that's public, the others will speak up. And if they don't?" I looked him square in the eye. "Then we go public, local news, online forums, everything." Eric leaned back, a small smile on his face. "You sure you weren't a tactical officer in another life? I just believe in fire prevention, and Marcus has been stacking kindling for years." By dinner time, Deborah was up, again moving slowly but with that quiet fire back in her eyes. I sat her down and explained everything, what we'd found, what we were going to do, and how we were going to protect the neighborhood. She listened, silent at first, then reached for my hand. "I was scared," she said softly. "Not just for me, for you. You've carried this alone." "Not anymore," I told her. "I've got help now." She smiled faintly. "Then finish it." I nodded. That night, I submitted the full photo and code violation report through the county's anonymous intake portal, attached Vasquez's checklist, added a short paragraph summarizing the safety concerns and the HOA's bypassing of municipal guidelines. Then, I printed the board petition template, 10 lines, 10 signatures. A single line at the bottom that read, "We request immediate board review of Marcus Bell's role and actions under HOA charter violations 6.7c, 4.1a, and 2.3f. Tomorrow, I'd walk the block again, but this time, I wouldn't be asking for stories. I'd be asking for signatures. The first knock was on Paul Garrison's door. He opened it with his usual cautious squint, the morning sun catching the edge of his reading glasses. I didn't need to explain much, just held up the petition and pointed to the line with Marcus's name printed in bold at the top. Paul didn't hesitate. "Been waiting on this," he said, and signed with a steady hand. The next 2 homes were just as quick. Daniela Chen not only signed but offered to print more copies and hand them to her co-workers who lived 2 streets over. Mrs. Bernstein called 2 of her neighbors while I stood in her foyer, and by the time I reached Willowbend Court, I had 6 signatures in less than 30 minutes. People weren't just ready. They were hungry for someone to draw the line. By the time I looped back around the cul-de-sac, I spotted Eric a block over, carrying a clipboard and wearing that quiet military focus he always slipped into when things got serious. He held up 4 fingers from across the street, his 4th signature in 20 minutes. That put us at 11. I met him outside the community clubhouse. "That's quorum," I said. Eric nodded. "You're gonna drop it off now?" "No," I said. "We're doing it at the next board meeting." His brow furrowed. "Wouldn't it be better to hit them before Marcus can prepare?" "He's already preparing," I said. "He'll sense this building, but if we deliver it during the open forum, it forces the board to respond publicly, forces them to act, and if they try to deflect, then we let the rest of the neighborhood see them squirm," Eric finished. I smiled. "Exactly." We returned home and began organizing the supporting materials. Lynn's emails were grouped with the financial discrepancies. The photos and measurements were sorted, labeled, and printed onto mounted boards for display. Eric scanned every document and backed it up in 3 places. One drive went into my toolbox, another into the glove box of his truck. "I've seen things disappear before," he said simply. "Not this time." Deborah sat with us at the table, marking each item we'd need on the night of the meeting. She didn't talk much, but her hand never left mine. There was a quiet determination in her eyes that matched the first time I saw her walk into the courthouse, alone, during the custody battle for her niece. Wounded, yes, but unwilling to yield. That evening, I got a text from Lynn. "He's agitated, skipped last informal session, pushing for executive discussion next meeting. He knows something's coming." Good. Let him feel it. I called in a favor next, someone I hadn't spoken to since I retired. Frank Delgado, a former city safety officer turned private consultant. "You still do walkthroughs?" I asked him. "For friends? Sure," he replied. "What's the catch?" "I need eyes on a community fence. I've already submitted a report, but a second expert would help." He arrived the next morning in jeans and boots, clipboard in hand, and we walked the full length of the perimeter. He didn't say much, just took measurements, photos, and made a few sounds of disbelief under his breath. At the end, he whistled. "That's a liability nightmare. Think it'll trigger a county response?" He nodded. "If it doesn't, someone's sleeping on the job. I'll prep my report." With that in motion, all the pieces were in place. The petition, the evidence, the expert opinions, the witness. Now it was just about timing. The board meeting was 2 days away. Public. Held in the community center multi-purpose room, the one with the flickering overhead lights, and the stage that hadn't been used since the holiday play in December. I'd walked past it 100 times. This time, I'd walk in prepared. As I shut the binder that night and slid it into my satchel, I realized something I hadn't let myself feel since this started. Not just confidence. Peace. Not because I'd already won, but because I was no longer reacting to Marcus. I was moving forward, and the neighborhood was moving with me. The night of the board meeting, the air in the community center was thick, warm, dry, expectant. Folding chairs filled quickly, neighbors who hadn't spoken in years exchanging quiet nods and whispered greetings. A few clutched copies of the petition. Others just watched the front table where the board members were setting up, murmuring to one another with stiff smiles and darting eyes. Marcus was already seated. Dark blazer. Clipboard in front of him. Untouched. He kept glancing at the door like he was expecting someone worse than me to walk through it. I stepped in with Eric on my right and Deborah just behind. She insisted on coming, belly full and steady. I didn't argue. She moved like a woman who wanted to be seen. We took our seats in the second row. I laid the binder across my lap, hands resting on the cover. Eric had the mounted photo boards leaning against the wall, ready. The meeting opened like any other. Call to order, approval of last month's minutes, a rambling financial report from a treasurer who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The air was heavy with anticipation, like the room itself was waiting for someone to light the fuse. Then the HOA president, a quiet man named Raymond Knox, cleared his throat. "We'll now move into open forum. Please keep remarks under 5 minutes." I stood without ceremony, walked slowly to the front, set the binder on the table, opened it to the first tab, and turned to the board. "My name is Thomas Greer. I'm a resident on Alder Lane, and I'm submitting on behalf of 11 households this formal petition calling for a board review of Marcus Bell's conduct and authority under Charter Provisions 6.7c, 4.1a, and 2.3f. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The room hushed. I continued, flipping to the next section. Included are documented financial irregularities, code violations in the recent fencing project, and verified examples of procedural misconduct, including threats, unilateral enforcement, and obstruction of resident input. I motioned to Eric, who stepped forward and propped the first photo board upright. The crooked fence post, the uneven pour, the time-stamped measurements, then another, highlighting the spreadsheet Lynn had compiled, with dates and reimbursements circled in red. Gasps rippled from the back rows. Marcus leaned forward, his voice sharp. "This is out of order." "No," I said. "What's out of order is issuing citations without board votes. What's out of order is approving a $13,000 fence install under a false emergency clause and using unlicensed labor. What's out of order is reimbursing yourself over $1,200 with no receipt on file." Knox raised a hand. "Let him finish." Marcus shot him a look, but the president didn't flinch. That was new. I turned to the audience. "Many of you have received warnings, citations, or threats over the last year. Some of you paid fines for violations that don't even exist in our bylaws. We have record of at least 7 of those, issued by Marcus without board review." I flipped to the final tab. Also included is a certified report from Frank Delgado, former city inspector, confirming that the fence project fails to meet county code in 3 measurable ways. That report has already been submitted to the county's building office. Now, the silence wasn't just heavy, it was sharp. I closed the binder. This is not a personal attack. This is a call for accountability and a demand for safety for our homes, our families, and our rights as members of this community. I stepped back. Marcus stood slowly, eyes narrowed. "You don't speak for this board." "No," I said. "But I speak for the residents who signed this petition, and for the wife you tried to intimidate, and for every neighbor who paid a fine because they were too scared to fight back." Knox cleared his throat again. "Given the documentation provided, I'm calling an executive session to review the claims. Mr. Bell, you will refrain from issuing any citations or representing the board until the review is complete." Marcus's mouth opened, then closed. No argument came. I returned to my seat. Deborah squeezed my hand. Eric exhaled slowly beside us, shoulders dropping. Behind us, the neighbors started whispering again. But now, it wasn't fear. It was energy. It was movement. The fuse was lit. And this time, it wasn't burning toward us. It was burning toward him. The fallout started before I even left the parking lot. People didn't just trickle out after the meeting. They stayed in clumps, murmuring, pointing, passing phones back and forth. I caught pieces of conversation as Deborah and I walked toward the truck. I knew something was off about those fines. He told me I couldn't plant rosemary in the front yard, said it was disruptive. "Did you see the reimbursement form? No receipt. Who even signs off on that?" By the time we reached the curb, 3 neighbors had approached us. Not with questions, with thanks. I didn't linger. I wasn't here for applause. But as I helped Deborah up into the passenger seat, Eric lingered behind, watching the board members slip away one by one. Marcus was the last to leave. He walked to his SUV without looking up. No clipboard, no parting glares, just a man trying not to look like he'd been hit square in the gut. And we weren't done. The county responded 2 days later. A letter arrived in the mail, official envelope, stamped and signed. The language was dry but clear. An inspector had reviewed the submitted evidence and found significant deviation from required safety code. A formal investigation had been opened, and the HOA was being contacted directly for access to contractor records and materials. That alone could have ended it. But what landed heavier was what came next. Knox called an emergency session. This time, Marcus didn't show. Instead, Lynn arrived with a printed folder in hand and a trembling calm about her. She read a prepared statement, eyes locked on the table as she recounted how Marcus had manipulated votes, concealed spending, and bypassed procedure. She didn't embellish. She didn't dramatize. She just told the truth. And then she handed over the emails. 2 board members resigned the next day. Not out of guilt, they claimed burnout. But everyone could read between the lines. Marcus had dragged them all into a corner, and now the light was pouring in. Deborah and I stayed quiet during that phase. We didn't need to push. The pressure had already built. The insurance provider began a coverage review. Contractors were questioned. Even the local paper picked up a short piece on community safety enforcement under scrutiny. Eric sent me the link, no subject line. I clicked on it and saw my own front porch in the background. Deborah's railing, still standing, solid and unbothered. Funny how that was the thing they wanted removed most. And it ended up becoming the symbol of the whole damn fight. A week later, the board held a public vote on Marcus's removal. The room was packed. Knox stood up front, calm as ever, and read the motion. Removal of Marcus Bell from all HOA authority positions, effective immediately, pending legal review of financial actions taken under his tenure. The vote was unanimous. No objections, no abstentions. Lynn sat near the back, hands folded, tears in her eyes. Not sadness, just relief. The kind that comes after months of pretending you didn't see the fire spreading. Afterward, Marcus didn't return any calls. His car disappeared from the usual spot. Someone said he took a leave of absence. Someone else said he moved in with family. I didn't ask, I didn't care, because the neighborhood felt different. Mailboxes weren't opened with dread anymore. Parents let their kids play in the common space without feeling watched. People waved again. Real waves, not the brittle kind that say, "Please don't notice me." Deborah and I sat on the porch that evening, the same steps where it all began. She rocked slowly, both hands on her stomach, now just days from her due date. "I thought it'd feel louder," she said. "The end of it." "It never does," I said. "It's not the explosion, it's the silence after." The railing creaked slightly beneath my hand, still sturdy, still mine. I watched the sun dip behind the oaks that framed our lot and listened to the quiet hum of a neighborhood finally breathing. It wasn't about revenge or punishment or winning. It was about drawing a line and holding it. 2 weeks later, Deborah went into labor just after sunrise. It was quiet, almost eerily so. No sirens, no frantic packing, just the low groan of the rocking chair stopping mid-arc and her hand reaching for mine. We made it to the hospital with time to spare. Eric stayed in the waiting room, pacing slow laps like he was back on base. When the nurse stepped out and gave me the nod, I swear the floor tilted under me. Deborah had delivered a baby girl, healthy, strong, full head of dark hair. And just like that, the world reset. We brought her home 3 days later. Neighbors left casseroles on the porch, flowers. One woman we barely knew from 2 streets over knitted a blanket with our daughter's initials stitched into the corner. Deborah cried when she saw it. So did I. The porch railing stood unchanged. I tightened the bolts that evening, not because it was loose, but because it felt like something worth doing, a ritual, a way to say, "This house is still ours." Lynn visited the next morning. She didn't stay long, just stood on the steps holding a small bouquet and looking lighter than I'd ever seen her. "Knox asked me to stay on as interim president," she said with a soft smile. "Said the board needed someone with a spine and a conscience." I raised an eyebrow. "You gonna do it?" She looked toward Deborah, who was swaying gently with the baby on her shoulder. "I already did," I nodded. "Then make it count." She touched the railing once, lightly, like it meant something, and walked back to her car. By the following week, the board had implemented new policies. No citations issued without board vote. All financial reimbursements required dual sign-off, and all major expenditures over $500 had to be posted publicly for resident review. Simple changes. But they meant everything. I saw Marcus only once after that. It was at the hardware store, of all places. He looked thinner, smaller somehow. He turned down another aisle the moment he saw me. I didn't follow. Some fights don't need to be reignited once they've burned themselves out. That afternoon, I sat out front while Deborah napped, the baby tucked in her bassinet beside her. I watched the neighborhood go quiet again. Sprinklers clicked on. A bike bell rang down the block. And for the first time in months, I let myself settle into the stillness. There was no noise, no weight, just peace. And that's when it hit me. This was never about a railing, not really. It was about standing your ground when someone tries to strip you of it, about refusing to let fear settle into your bones, about reminding the people around you, your neighbors, your family, even the quiet ones hiding behind drawn curtains, that bullies lose when you stand together. That safety isn't something granted by a board or a rule book. It's something we build, bolt by bolt, brick by brick, and it holds if we make it hold. So, if you've ever faced down a clipboard tyrant, if you've ever walked through your own neighborhood feeling smaller than you should, remember this: you're not alone, and you're not powerless. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. Because there are more of us than they think, and we've only just begun.